Councillors, officers and members of the public, welcome to the 7th of August 2024 Ordinary Meeting of Council. I will now open the meeting with the first item on this evening's agenda, the reading of the prayer. Almighty God, be with us as we work for the people of the Shire of Moorabool. Grant us wisdom that we may care for the Shire as true stewards of your creation. May we be aware of the great responsibilities placed upon us. Help us to be just in all our dealings, and may our work prosper for the good of all. Amen. I will now read the Acknowledgement of Country. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Item 3, in accordance with Moorabool Shire Council's governance rules, the Council will be recording and live streaming this meeting. The Moorabool News and Star Weekly have also been granted permission to record this meeting. Item 4 and 5, present and apologies. We have 2 apologies tonight, Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Berry, and we have Councillor Edwards online. Item 6, confirmation of minutes. We have minutes from the 3rd of July 2024 Ordinary Meeting of Council and the 17th of July Special Meeting of Council to be confirmed. Do I have a councillor to move the minutes? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Item 7, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest to declare? No. Thank you. Item 8, public question time. We have no public questions tonight. Item 9, petitions. We have no petitions to be considered at tonight's meeting. Item 10, presentations and deputations. We have 1 registered speaker to this meeting who will be invited to address the council at the commencement of the relevant item. Councillors, we will now move on to the Chief Executive Officer's reports, item 11.1, 2017 to 2021 Moorabool Shire Council Plan, Outstanding Actions Progress Report, June 2024. Do I have a councillor to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. The next report is item 11.2, 2021 to 2025 Moorabool Shire Council Plan, Progress Report, Year 3, Quarter 4, June 2024. Do I have a councillor to move the recommendation in our papers tonight? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dudzik, thank you. Any dissent? All those in favour? It's carried. Councillors, we will now move on to Community Planning and Development Reports, item 12.1, Moorabool Retail Strategy. We have 1 registered speaker to this item. Ross Closter has registered to speak to this item and is in the chamber this evening. Mr Closter, please take a seat. Get comfortable. Mr Closter, you will have 3 minutes to speak. I'm sorry to hear that. So you've got your order, that's great. Just turn the microphone on when you're ready, and after your 3 minutes, councillors may ask you questions if they wish. Sure. Thank you.
So Mayor, councillors, council officers, thank you for your time. We're the owners of a property known as 10 East Madingley Road in Madingley, also known as Birch's Old Chicken Farm, and are here to talk to you about the retail strategy, and in particular, the bulky goods element of the retail strategy. I'm not sure if you guys have it before you, but if I could ask you to turn to page 26 of the strategy, if you do, or page 55 of the appendix to the agenda. If you don't happen to have it, that's okay, I'll read it out for you. Action 19 on this page states, and I quote, identify a preferred area to accommodate bulky goods retail precinct in Bacchus Marsh, south of the railway line and with convenient access to Geelong Bacchus Marsh Road and the planned Eastern Link Road. The area identified should be able to readily deliver efficiently serviced and well-connected precinct with a total area of 10 to 12 hectares allocated to bulky goods, end quote. We support this action 100%. Our site at East Madingley Road is south of the train line, is sufficient to accommodate 10 to 12 hectares, is within 100 metres of the Bacchus Marsh train station, has a huge 500-metre frontage to Geelong Bacchus Marsh Road, and is contiguous with the existing urban area and is well connected to Main Street via Fiskin Street and via Grant Street. In other words, it ticks all the boxes that are required by this action. Our site has also been identified in previous studies as being the most appropriate for future bulky goods development. However, our biggest concern is with a council officer response to an email we sent yesterday, the response we received today, querying the timing of this identification process required by this action. The officer said that this process will not commence until after both Parwin and the Madingley planning study are completed. As you know, the Parwin PSP is indefinitely on hold, pending earless dragon issues and the like. This could mean Action 19 is not started for 5 years and would likely be another 5 years before the work is done, land rezoned, and bulky goods development is available to retailers. We need to start the bulky goods process now. We can't wait for Parwin. The retail strategy identifies 10 to 12 hectares of land that's required. There is one site that's identified as part of this strategy, which is 30 Fiskin Street, and that's only 3.7 hectares. One large retailer such as Bunnings will take up 100% of that site. If we want to entice national retailers, reduce escape expenditure and grow jobs in Bacchus Marsh, then sufficient land for bulky goods development is absolutely critical. We need to get Action 19 started immediately and not wait for Parwin or any other study. It's blatantly obvious Parwin is not going to provide any meaningful short to medium term bulky goods supply. It's too far out of town for the existing Bacchus Marsh catchment, and retailers will simply not go there in the short to medium term. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mr Coster. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Coster? Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I've got one just of officers, if I can, if there's none of Mr Coster.
Sorry, David. We might just get you to... we might just turn you up a little bit. We just can't hear you very well. Hang on a sec. We'll see if we can do it. Okay. Maybe give us a test run now.
How does that sound?
All right. Maybe just talk a bit louder, if you could.
Okay then. My question is actually of officers. Is there anything that prohibits an application coming in the next 12 months, regardless of the retail strategy, to use an area for bulky goods, as, for example, Mr Coster's area?
Mr Bezet now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The land Mr Coster is referring to needs to be rezoned to accommodate the future bulky goods.
Yeah, so there would be nothing to stop a proponent putting in an application to rezone with a proposal, right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, there's no any restriction placed on application being submitted. What Council will do, Council will look at the retail strategy. We'll also look at the strategic justification that comes with that proposed application. So that will have to be considered by Council, whether it's a suitable application, whether there's strategic justification to progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any other questions for Mr Coster or officers?
Initially, Mr Coster, but I have a follow-up for Henry, if I may.
Thank you, Councillor.
Picking up on what Henry just said there, Ross, if identification was to start today, how long would it take, if an application was to start today to rezone that land, how long would it take till the land would be ready to be developed for retailers? I'm just thinking, I don't understand how long these things take.
Depends on what, it's a really good question. It depends on what process Council want to take in relation to the strategic justification. If they want to go through this identification analysis first, and then a rezoning, and then a permit, we're probably looking at 6 to 8 years if that was started today. If council do as the officer has suggested and delay doing the identification, then that could add a further 5 years to the process. So it might be 13 years before we've got any bulky goods. These rezonings, planning scheme amendments take a really long period of time. Couple of years is the absolute minimum. And if there's 2 of those that have to happen concurrently, then it all just blows out. There was a strategy done in 2018 for bulky goods. We're 6 years later and that was just left sitting on the shelf. So I think we've done enough strategies. It's time to actually take some action.
Follow up, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Wood.
It's a slightly different scenario, but this is a question for Henry. But by introduction, I know, and many of you may know, a major industrial employer who's moved his business now out of council to Leverton, and with that goes all the expenditure and all the jobs. So there is a shortage of land out there, and it is frustrating for businesses. But my question for Henry is, what is the downside, or is there a downside in having the land identified commercially now in the retail strategy, rather than saying, let's start the process and it may take 6, 8, 13 years, and by then we're bursting at the seams. What is the dangers or what is the downside of starting now?
Mr Bezet now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So to answer the question, I might need to clarify that 30 Fiskin Street has been identified for bulky goods, like Mr. Kloster referenced. That will provide, according to the analysis by our consultants, will provide for the short to medium term, 5 to 10 years. The additional bulky goods is linked to the future growth of the new precincts, Station Precinct, Miramu, all of those. So an idea is that we can't really, the proposal is not to progress any rezonings until we've got the short to medium term adequately addressed, and those additional rezonings will cater for the future growth. The future growth is still a number of years away. They need to be rezoned. They're currently on hold through the Dragon process. It's also a fairly long lead period from getting the rezoning approved to getting the development completely built out. So the strategy looks at up until 2041. So looking at a short to medium term, 5 to 10 years, the Fiskin Street provides adequate response to the immediate need, short to medium term need, and any future development will be tied into the future growth. So we can start a process now, but it's unlikely to align with the strategy and the projected growth.
Thank you, Mr Bezet now. Anything else, Councillor Ward?
I have a follow-up, if I may.
Yes.
So the 3.5 acres at 30 Fiskin is identified to meet our short to medium term needs, but that may well be taken up if a Bunnings comes in and then all of a sudden we're scampering. So we go back to the strategy which identified possibly 10 to 12 hectares required. What is the downside? I'll repeat that part. What is the downside of planning for that rezoning of that land now? Because I'm not a developer and I'm not a businessman, but to me the commercial realities will dictate whether that land is taken up or not. So if businesses see an opportunity to develop a hub up there, like there is at Wendouree or Altona or there is at Melton, it's going to draw people there for shopping to the bulky goods precinct. So commercial realities will identify whether the land gets sold or not. What is the downside of including that now as an option for a secondary site?
Mr Bezet now.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, Action 19 already identifies the land south of the railway line with easy access to Geelong Bachasmas Road. So that area is already identified as a future area for bulky goods. The strategy looks at short, medium and long term. So it says in the 5 to 10 year time frame, Fiskin Street will adequately cater for the demand. The area that's been identified for future up until the period 2041 is tied into the future growth of those precincts. So, I mean, an application can be submitted, a rezoning application, but as I said, once again, that will be tied back to the strategy, and the strategy will identify there's no need, immediate need or short or medium term need to rezone that land. So it doesn't exclude that land from submitting application. it just indicates that there's no immediate strategic justification for that land. So that land has not been excluded from the strategy for future bulky goods. It's not excluded. And to start a process rezoning now is unlikely to tie in with the timeframes from the demand as outlined in the retail strategy.
Just your mic.
Zuiden, you mentioned strategic justification, so there's no strategic justification now for the short term. So I'll flip it back to you, if I may. Why do you think there's a strategic justification to include that now?
I'll answer that two ways. First and foremost, from a planning point of view, the strategic justification has been done by two previous reports. There was an essential economics report which was done in 2018. Now, what that did, that compared a number of sites that have the potential to accommodate bulky goods. And it found that our site, after being considered amongst a range of criteria, was the most appropriate for future bulky goods. There was also the Mattingley planning study. Again, that assessed the best and highest uses for a lot of sites in Mattingley. And again, it showed that our land was the highest and best use for our land was future bulky goods, given its exposure to the Geelong Road and its proximity to town. From a commercial side of things, the demand is there. So we know that Bunnings want to come to town. We know that Chemist Warehouse want to come to town. We know that Horseland want to come to town. Bacchus Marsh is about to reach a critical threshold where all these national retails, their population triggers are reached and they want to come to town. If just that 3.7 hectare site is the only one and Bunnings go there, then there's no opportunity for any other retailer to come to site. It's all been absorbed. So it's a very narrow focus if we're just looking at that one site. And I have to correct the officer that it's not long-term that the 10 to 12 hectares is needed. It's the short to medium
Mr.
term.
Costa, we can't be criticising. We can't be correcting our officers.
Okay, it's in the report in any event. But so yeah, we're not looking very far in advance if we're just focusing on 3.7 until 2041. We won't get all these national retailers. We won't get the jobs. We won't get the economic spend and prevent all that escape expenditure that's going to Ballarat, Wendouree, Melton and Melbourne.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Any other questions? Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Is this for
The third retail strategy.
is this for Mr. Costa or officers?
No, officers.
Officers? Thank you.
This is the third retail strategy, and I agree. In 2018, there was some sites that were identified, there was needs identified. It's unfortunate that in the new one, there doesn't seem to be a good cut and paste of the data from 2018 into this report, which creates a problem in itself because you need this stuff to carry over. So the questions, there's two basic questions. And one is that we've got an infrastructural question in terms of commercial land that we've been discussing for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's the first question. Now, do we have the capacity from an infrastructure point of view to actually facilitate bulky goods in that particular region without affecting the stuff that's already in train or planning stuff that's already in train? So that's the first question. So if you want to, if H wants to answer that first.
Yep. Mr. Bezzetner, do you want to answer that question first, please?
So, Madam Mayor, the retail strategy looks at a projected growth and the future demands. It looks at bulky goods. So it identifies the Fiskin Street, as we've mentioned, as the immediate response. That land is already rezoned. It's mixed use. And we've got application already with state government, a request to develop that land. So that land does not include a Bunnings at this point in time. The proposal does not include a Bunnings. So I think the strategy does clearly identifies Fiskin Street to respond to the immediate need, and that will cater for 5 to 10 years. Then it identifies future land, which has already been identified for the longer term growth, and that land will be rezoned as part of the future ongoing process. So Mr. Kloster's land has been included. I'm not sure if I've answered the question completely.
Yeah, the second question will pick up.
Mr. CEO, did you want to add?
Through the chair, I think your question was relating to the infrastructure and in particular around power and water and these kind of things. So we have had a report commissioned which has gone to state government which indicates there are capacity issues within Bacchus Marsh and those elements, but we don't have the level at a micro level to say whether it's this development, but there's definitely capacity issues within the grid, and the grid will require a significant upgrade in the not too distant future, and that work is being presented to the state government as part of a business case for the upgrade of the power network and water.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Councillor Tatchell.
That'll lead to the next question, because based on the fact that we don't have a report or a strategy based on infrastructure shortfalls or deficiencies are in that region now, it seems incredulous that then we try and connect the Parwin employment zone as a trigger towards the bulky goods zone. To me, they're two separate issues. Both have infrastructural issues. The infrastructural issues in terms of the Parwin employment zone were addressed in terms of gas and electricity through federal grants and state grants. So we've got a lot of building blocks here that are missing, or foundational blocks, even though we know what the end result is, unless we actually put some foundations in the ground. In terms to make this thing happen, we've got some massive issues. But I think the first question will be, why is Parwin employment zone connected to our bulky goods strategy, in consideration that it's our third retail report on bulky goods? We know that we've been stalled in terms of Parwin, and to be fair, Parwin was a thought bubble 10 years ago and probably hasn't really progressed to the giddy heights that was projected to Andrews, but anyhow, that's beside the point. So that's the first question, why are the two connected? And then the second question will be, if we are to have a retail strategy that sits above the obvious deficiencies that we have from an infrastructure point of view, wouldn't it be prudent that we include in the retail strategy a capacity to build a foundation so that the actual retail strategy can be built off, rather than doing it in the cloud, because it's got nothing to grab hold of at the bottom end? So they're the two questions.
I'm happy to take the second question through the chair.
Thank you, Mr.
So we've commissioned a detailed analysis over the last 3 years on capacity constraints and where it actually exists within the Shire, not just in Bacchus Marsh, but also in Milan and also in Wallace and Bungaree. So we understand exactly where the capacity constraints are in both water and power. State government are aware of those, and we take that to state government as part of any process, and we work with state government on working to achieve those. The planners were aware of those constraints, so that plan has been developed not in isolation, is within the bubble of that. As to why the bulky goods, again, Parwin started long before me, so I don't know if you were able to answer, Henry, the bulky goods component for Parwin. That was the question. Yeah, happy to.
I know why the two are related. So.
Yeah.
Mr. Bazut now.
So Madam Mayor, just to clarify, the retail strategy looks at a 10-year time frame, and it looks at where we want the activity centres, how we strengthen existing activity centre, where we support new development, etc. So it looks more than broadly just the Parwin employment precinct itself. It identifies the need for bulky goods, and then it looks at an area where bulky goods can be located. That area does include south of the railway line, access to or easy access to Geelong Road. So it does include a Parwin area. So as part of the future growth and future planning, we are looking at all the infrastructure requirements and provisions. So that's why we say that we can accommodate immediate need in Fiskin Street. There's adequate access to services and infrastructure. As part of that longer-term 5-year program to review, that ties back into the growth precincts, and that also includes service provision, etc. So that will all form part of that. So the retail strategy goes more than just the bulky goods, and the bulky goods does recognise that the Parwin has got constraints, and that ties back to all of the growth planning that's happening there.
Thank you, Mr. Bazut now. Councillor Tatchell.
So that leads to the obvious questions after that. Excuse me. We currently have Victoria Plan, which is the old Melbourne Plan, which the state government has now put a rush on. And they're basically running around Victoria like chooks with their heads cut off, trying to play catch-up football against some poor planning decisions that were made some time ago in the state. And then, of course, they've got some infrastructural problems that go along with that in terms of investment in the state. So they're out there at the moment with the housing strategy, and a massive report was put out 2 weeks ago based on regionally how we accommodate this housing strategy, which is once again a politician's thought bubble because of a need thing rather than the reality. Because you still got to have the infrastructure, but you can't have planning constraints. I mean, it's a paradox. You have a planning constraint and then say, now we need to grow. I mean, it's a paradox. But so the question is that why are the two things not related? I mean, if we don't have a regional housing issue going forward in terms of how we plan forward, and I go back to, if we go back to 1960 to say 58 to 60, where when the immigration policies in this country decided that Craigieburn would create jobs in a regional area, as it was a regional area back then with a population of less than 8 or 9 million people. And then they built the factory to make sure those people would be employed. So, and then the housing came next. So the question from a planning or strategic planning point of view is, whilst we're trying to align a bulky goods process with a power and employment zone, wouldn't it be more prudent to say that we know that what the population growth is and how it's expanded, because we've seen that over the last 3 terms of council, where we predicted one thing and it nearly trebled. But what we haven't got is a retail strategy that runs on the same tram track in consideration of how many houses or how many people are going to live in the Moorabool region. So the question will be, how do we get across to the minister, well, there's 2 ministers involved here, to say that we need to fast track not just the housing and planning project, which is what they want to do, which is a much more expedited plan because it's done through Victoria Plan. And I know that overrides some of our capacity within council, but it does give us an opportunity to move forward quicker. Shouldn't we also be lobbying to say that there needs to be jobs and infrastructure put in place so that we can actually create a communal environment within Moorabool that's balanced between housing, jobs, and of course a retail strategy that matches both. So the question, I know we need to get to the question eventually, but in order to get to the question, you need to understand that all of these components, unless they're all together, we've got a problem. We have a number of strategies, but what's missing is the link, because we could totally rely on the state government to fast forward these planning ideas to marry up with what we've got in terms of population growth. So the question will be, how can we then, I know we're involved in the housing strategy going forward to accommodate the population explosion in the peri-urban, how can we now go back to the state government and say, how can we make these two projects align so that we're balanced, that we can, one, provide the jobs, provide all the infrastructure, and keep that money in our economy, as a gentleman said, to keep the money in the local economy. So the question is, why isn't it, and how can we, and why is Parliament involved in that?
Mr CEO.
CEO. It's a long question. There's quite a few components to it.
Long answer.
So what I would say is we have considered all of that. So the Plan Melbourne or Plan Victoria, as it's known, has housing targets for Moorabool Shire Council that are not a million miles away from our own targets. I think there's about a 5,000 difference, and if you really look at infill, that will probably pick up that. So if you look at our targets that we've based the number of plans that are coming to council on, really and truly they probably do align Where the disconnect seems to be happening at the moment is around the 80-20 rule, where they're saying 80% of the development has to be infill, 20 greenfield, and the reason they're saying that is around, in certain instances, is around the cost of infrastructure to be provided. We've argued quite strongly that whether you build it infill or whether you build it in greenfield, your actual upgrade to the power network and other components that are required is still required, because ultimately it's a capacity issue here that it isn't in certain other areas. So we've had conversations, and as part of the peri-urban group of councils, which include the outer rings such as Surf Coast, Golden Plains, Baw Shire, Bass Coast, we all have very similar kinds of issues, and the 80-20 rule doesn't really stack up. It might work in Plan Melbourne, but it doesn't necessarily work in Plan Victoria. So if you were to have Plan Melbourne and Plan Regional Cities, that could probably make sense. But I think when you're doing Plan Victoria, that doesn't really add up. And we've done quite a lot of lobbying at a peri-urban level on that. And that's why, to be honest with you, we have the understanding of where the shortfall is. We actually have the dollar amounts. To give you an example, we were able to tell a developer recently exactly how much the water and power was going to cost. There's not many people that can do that, and that was because that work was commissioned based on our growth figures. So the strategies you're looking at have been built on our growth figures, which are, and I know there's a lot of councils out there giving out about the targets, but from our point of view, they're not too dissimilar from where we thought they would be. The issue is that the methodology of delivering that growth, there is a difference of opinion, even between state government departments, but also with really how we've already progressed in this shire. So significant amounts of work have been done over the last number of years with the VPA. I was trying to think what I was going to say, VBA, with the VPA, the Victorian Planning Authority, which are our bodies for Miramu and for Parwin to do work on that. And then we've done the work on Balan and Hopetoun Park as well. So what I would say it is, we are moving in a line probably similar to what state government are doing. Probably where the disconnect is how that population and where it's actually located, even though we're 5-6 years down the track on a lot of these developments. It's the old adage where the plane is getting built while you're in the air. I think some of that is happening at the moment, but what we're doing is we're basing it on our forecasts. We've probably been right for the last couple of years as to where it's gone down. It has slowed in the last two. That's what I would say, and I think that's not. We're not unique in that sense, but definitely there has been there's various reasons for that with windfall gains tax and various other elements that have come into the marketplace, and some capacity constraints in the system as well. So what I would say is the plans that we're producing are roughly in line with what the state government population numbers are saying. Where we differ in where that population sits, the exact locations at this moment in time. My view is that will change, because I think it's unrealistic to think you're going to have 3 or 4 story apartments in Bacchus Marsh and Balan. I just can't see that working. But I've been wrong before.
Thank you, Mr. Sear.
I just got to go one more then on that. So in terms of we've got a time frame based on the practice as it sits today in terms of planning for these things, but in terms of the infrastructure, the question will be that if we have an infrastructure plan and we have a costing relative to what we need as a foundation to build on, what sort of time frame would it take to put that infrastructure in place, keeping in mind that we're living in a state where the back pocket's missing out of the state government and the wind's blowing pretty hard up the backside of it. But in terms of where it sits financially, because I think the two things are related. One, we're talking 10 to 15 years to get a box strategy up and running, but none of that can start unless you pour the foundation. So what sort of time frame are we looking at? Is it a lobbying issue? Is it a financial issue? Is it a time frame issue? Does the state have the capacity?
Through the
Mr.
chair.
Seah.
Through the chair, it's a mixture, is what I would say. So there's no one answer. I think lobbying is definitely part of it, and having the information to be able to lobby with in a concrete form is part of it. In addition, I think there's probably going to, because of the issue you mentioned around the state finances, there's probably going to have to be some different models looked at as to how this infrastructure gets in, because one of the reasons why they're looking for that concentration in already urban areas is so that they don't have to invest in that infrastructure. So, I mean, the common phrase that I'm hearing in meetings these days is, you know, we have to sweat these assets. Well, it's like anything. You can sweat things too much and then they collapse. Everything has a tipping point. So I think there's a bit of analysis to do, and I think I think there's an oversimplification of what's happening with the point of view of this 80-20 rule. I think it's valid in certain instances, but it's definitely not valid in all. And you don't save the huge sums of money you seem to think you're going to save on infrastructure if the infrastructure isn't there in the first place. The infrastructure has to be there in the first place for you to be able to sweat it. So there's different components, but I definitely think advocacy is a large part of it, and we've been quite prominent. And for those people who are aware, the federal government recently announced significant funding for infrastructure that councils can apply to. So that's one avenue we will be looking to. Then there's also working with the power companies and working with the water authorities, because in particular the water authorities are part of the Essential Services Commission, such as we are. So we have to work with them because they have to get the plans into their strategic resource plan, their strategic plan that goes to the Essential Services Commission that's adopted, and we've worked quite well with the water authorities on that, and that's again because we were able to get the work done up front. And probably what has happened is this Plan Victoria or Plan Melbourne, and there just seems to be some mixed messages. I think they will get resolved. I think the issue that has been mentioned here around Parwin and the Dragon and this, that and the other, I think they will get resolved too. My understanding is that they have identified a methodology to be able to use, because previously they didn't have a methodology to use to locate the Dragon. So what you're looking at now is giant areas across a map which have areas of habitat, and not just in Bacchus Marsh. I mean, I can say Bacchus Marsh because it was published in the paper, but you know, stretching from Geelong all the way up, all of that land is not going to be set aside. All of that land is not suitable habitat, but they had no real methodology, as far as I'm aware, of actually identifying the natural habitat of that particular creature. I understand that they've now identified a methodology. It's not the one that they were working towards, but there is another methodology. And what it will do is it'll go through the normal process then, which is part and parcel of development. But I think because this situation was so unique with this particular species, I think there was high sensitivities around it, and that's quite right. And we're working with the relevant developers that are impacted, and we're working with the state government and Zoos Victoria as required. But what I would say is the plans do align with roughly where state governments see it. I think if you add in the infill and you got some other small developments in, say, Wallace and Bungaree, and that we're probably at that number that they've actually said. We're not dissimilar. There's about 4 councils, I think, roughly in line with them, and to be honest with you, I think we would be one of them.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, but I think this is a big issue. And my next question will be that, you know, obviously the windfall tax has become a slush fund that's gone straight back into the government coffers and state government. But in terms of regional areas where we're running at about 9.5% return on our investment for what we put into state government, where we provide 30% of it, or 27%. Wouldn't it be reasonable to make an argument as a peri-urban shire to say that if we're going to develop our contributions, we also need to take into consideration that the windfall tax is supposed to provide infrastructure, and that maybe it should be siloed so that when we need to develop these areas and have them fast-tracked, that the windfall tax should be siloed towards those projects to make sure that we can parallel the two issues in terms of housing, jobs and infrastructure. I don't know if any other shires have made that proposal. I mean, I know Ballarat's making a proposal in terms of energy, but this is a bigger issue because we can't get that work done until we get the infrastructure. But if the developers contribute via the windfall tax, we were able to bridge that gap and make it shorter. Can that be done?
Yeah, just through the chair, it's a dangerous place to enter my head, Councillor Tatchell, and I think you've entered my head. So we were in Canberra 2 weeks ago, and we basically put probably 4 to 5 months worth of effort into a report that was created by Mesh Consulting, which was really around exactly what you're referring to, is where some of that funds that are raised need to stay in the area, and in addition, at both a state and a federal level, it needs to be recognised that funds generated in an area to a certain extent need to be stayed there to put the infrastructure in to allow that growth. And we have put a number of proposals, and that document will be public in the next week or so. So I think we're going into state government to present it next week. So it's being presented to the opposition and the current government in Canberra, and now it's going to be presented at a state level to both current government and opposition as well. And that's really what it entails. It's exactly what you've referred to there, and it's the 5 interface councils have come together and commissioned that work, and it's Mesh Consulting that done that on our behalf. So I'd be happy to take the councillors through that as part of a briefing over the next couple of weeks. It's going to go public soon.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor Dudzik, you had a question?
Yes, I do. It's for officers. Does the retail strategy in its current form prevent what the applicant is wanting to progress from happening? And if it does, how can we help move it forward?
Mr. Bezet now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The applicant's land is included as part of Action 19 to identify his land as a future investigation area and allocation for bulky goods. What the strategy says is that in the short to medium term, we cater for the immediate demand. The future demand, which includes his land, is tied to that future growth. And there was a whole conversation about that future growth, the timing, the infrastructure, all of that. So his land is not precluded or excluded from future bulky goods. It only relates to, it's not identified exclusively now at this point in time. It's identified as part of the future growth scenario. He can at any point in time submit a rezoning application, but as I indicated, that will be tied back to the retail strategy itself, as well as the future growth. Because the strategy does indicate growth projections, which is aligned, like the CEO said, with our own planning, the VPA planning, what we've got in the urban framework, urban growth framework. So his land is not immediately needed for bulky goods. It will tie into the future growth, and it's identified for that purpose in the strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Bazut. Now, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, it was remiss of me not to say at the start, I commend the consultation that's gone into this report. I note the previous reports, and there's been enormous consultation that's gone into this, and I commend the officers involved. And however, I did meet with the officers recently because I felt I was concerned about a couple of things that were flagged in the background report that are not in this draft final report, and one of them was the identification of the need to rezone in the background report that didn't appear in the draft report. But it seems to me, listening to what Mr. Closter and Henry have been saying, is they're actually identifying the same timeframes. So I don't know why we can't fix this quite simply. We've identified that 64% of our spending is done online or outside Moorabool Shire. To fix that, we need a broader range of goods and services in Moorabool, and that includes clothing and retail, and bulky goods as part of that. Henry mentioned that this strategy is short-term, 5 to 10 years, and we accept that. But Henry also mentioned that an application can go in for rezoning, but that'll be tied back to the retail strategy. So I think that illustrates the need to flag in rezoning as an option in the retail strategy. Our CEO said earlier we need to get plans, or need to get planning included into the strategic planning for the Essential Services Commission for our strategic services. We're talking water, electricity and everything else. So Henry said that this plan is for the short term, 5 to 10 years. Mr Closter has said if an application went in today, it would take 6 to 8 years. So by definition, we're actually talking about the same time frame. So I'm saying if we actually identified we needed to rezone land and got cracking today, it wouldn't be ready to the end of the short term, and then we'd be ready to go and hit the ground running in the medium term. So my question is, why can't we amend the retail strategy to identify one of the actions as the need to immediately work with the state government based on our CEO's feedback and what Henry said earlier about future applications for rezoning? Why can't we amend this retail strategy?
Councillors, through the chair, I think we're just going around in circles. That question is the third time it's been asked. So I think from my point of view is what you have is the officer's recommendation based on, as I said, it was based on the planning. It's based on what the officers have said. I think we've answered the questions and now we're just circulating on the same ones. So I think it's a decision of the councillors to, so your question is, there's nothing to stop you amending the report to include it if that's what you want to do, but you have the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Closter. You could take your seat. Thank you. We might... Yes, Councillor Ward.
Move that we suspend standing orders for discussion, please.
I agree. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Okay. Mike's still on.
I think the question.
Oh, I can't hear anything now.
We can do
Sorry.
We can do an amendment if there's to motion. If well, what did he say? If he could have his microphone on, I might know.
No, sorry. I was asking if I could move an amendment to the recommendation. Yes, I can. I want to discuss with the councillors if there was an appetite.
In private, that's what you want?
Yeah, in private. Yes.
No. No, we can't. No.
Okay. At this point in time, based on the feedback from what I've heard over the last 20 minutes, I'd like to move the recommendation with an amendment that we include the capacity to investigate the ability to rezone the land to plan now for the medium-term growth and the medium-term need. I don't know how I could word that better, Henry.
Yes, Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, look, I'm not against what Rob wants to do. My only concern would be that if we're going to prepare an amendment, it's got to be fairly concise.
That's right. That's right.
Would
We're also missing
Yes.
2
I'm
councillors.
conscious of that, and maybe a deferral might be a better option.
That's where I'm coming, and that way that would give Rod an opportunity to
Yep, I agree.
to get some advice on what type of amendment you want to do,
Yep.
whether it's actually possible,
Yep.
and we can bring the other 2 councillors into the conversation. I think it's just safer, that's all.
Yep, defer.
Because it might bite us on that. But
Yeah,
if we're going to
and-
do that, how are we going for time as a caretaker?
Mr. Bazut now or Mr. CEO? How much time to
Well, it's how long is a piece of string? We don't know. As I said to you, you have the officer recommendation. Well, what we would be doing is working with Councillor Ward because he might want an alternate, but the officer recommendation would not be changing on the basis of this. It would be, so the deferral would be the time to take a look at what Councillor Ward is actually proposing and then to ensure that we can come up with an alternate motion that makes sense.
Yep.
and being mindful that we are coming up to caretaker.
So can I just ask a question? It's probably
Yes,
a Celeste
Councillor
question. Is the next OMC before caretaker?
So the next OMC is on the 4th of September.
I move to defer. Oh, sorry, we have to come
we'll
out.
just, we'll just come out of standing
I
orders.
just want to ask something. So,
Yes, David?
so this council's done a lot of work on the retail strategy role. We've had a lot of feedback. So if we defer, we're probably going to go to a new council, new people, have to go through a whole heap of extra work. When the reality is, from what I think, from what I've seen, I'd like to be corrected. Otherwise, whilst it doesn't directly say that we're going to lead the rezoning, there is nothing to stop the proponent from leading the rezoning of that piece of land tomorrow. And in consideration of the retail strategy, it may be bringing it forward, but it would be at the expense of the developer rather than, if I understand, is council going to lead the other rezoning?
No, I don't think the council would be leading the rezoning. I think you're correct, Councillor Tatchell. I think what Councillor Edwards. I think what
We do get mixed up a bit.
Sorry, I think what Henry was saying was that when it's considered, it would be considered in relation to the retail strategy, but the council of the day would make the decision ultimately on that.
100%. That's what I think.
Yeah, so it's the council of the day would make the decision. What Henry is saying is ultimately the officers in considering it would actually consider the retail strategy as part of that, but the councillors of the day can do as they wish.
Councillor Thatcher?
Yeah, so just, as we know, this is a guideline. So if I'm trying to kill two birds with one rocket. So if, for example, the strategy was accepted the way it is tonight, and Councillor Ward created a motion, a notice of motion for the 4th of September that annexed what we've approved, so it becomes another item, because that's what we vote. So if this goes to defer, it comes back the same. But if we approved it tonight and Councillor Ward includes, and involving the other councillors that are missing, he includes the amendments that you want put in place as a notice of motion rather than amendment, on the basis of guideline, I would have thought we could still achieve that. Is that correct?
Through the chair, my recommendation would be to, if that's what the councillors so desired, would be to just to defer the whole report, and then it would come back, and then the other councillors, and that you would have the alternate, whatever we want to call it, the alternate motion that Councillor Ward is proposing. I think to adopt it and then try and retrospectively put something onto it would. I think it's an unnecessary complication, to be honest with you. I think it would still be heard by this council. So the next meeting is of this council. So you have one meeting left, which is the 4th of September, where that item would be brought back, and then the councillors would make a decision, and Councillor Ward would more than likely, I'm not preempting, but would probably have an alternate motion that the councillors would consider on that date.
Okay. Any other questions? Can I have someone move us back, out of standing orders, please? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Okay. Thank you for the discussion. I will move to you, councillors. Thank you.
I move to defer, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So you move to defer. Do I have a seconder to defer? Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Okay, councillors, we'll now move on to Customer and Corporate Services Reports. Item 13.1, Customer Experience Strategy Review, Community Engagement Results. Councillors, you have a recommendation in your papers tonight. Do I have a mover?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. We will now move on to Community Assets and Infrastructure Reports. Item 14.1, Petition, Speed Limit Reduction of Ballan-Edgerton Road, Mount Edgerton. Councillors, you have a recommendation outlined in the papers before you. Do I have a mover? Councillor Tatchell, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ward, any dissent? All those in favour? Councillor Edwards, were you for?
No, I went early, sorry.
So all those in favour? Carried. Thought I'd check. Item 15, other reports. There are no other reports listed in tonight's agenda. Item 16, notices of motion. We have one notice of motion, 16.1, Bacchus Marsh and Melton Regional Hospital. Councillors, you have a recommendation in the paper before you regarding this report. Do I have a councillor to move the recommendation?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Tatchell, thank you. Yes, Councillor Edwards, do you have a question?
I was just going to say, can Councillor Ward give us a bit of a prelude to it as the introduction of the motion?
Happy to, yes. Yes, thank you,
Yeah,
Councillor
look,
Ward.
I've outlined in some detail there, but I have been contacted by some local residents who are working there, and they've made me aware that there is a recruitment ban, so if people are leaving, they're not being replaced, so there's a reduction of staffing levels, potentially. There will be a reduction, therefore, in the services being offered to local residents, and I'm deeply concerned that the $900 million hospital in Melton, which was to commence this year, hasn't. So the need to continue funding into the Bacchus Marsh and Melton Regional Hospital to service our growing community is critical. And I'm just asking us to write to the Premier, the Minister for Health, the Professor, the Honourable Jill Hennessy, as Chairperson of Western Health, and our local member for Eureka, Michaela Settle, that the commitments given when Derrawara Health merge into Western Health be honoured. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Is there any questions in relation to the notice of motion? Councillor Edwards?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yep.
So just, this is probably Mr CEO, because we were given guarantees that there wouldn't be a reduction of services. In fact, there'd be an increase. Is that correct? When they amalgamated Western Health with Derrawara Health to fill their Western Health budget gap shortfall.
That's exactly right, Councillor Edwards. I think the term was no net loss, if I remember correctly, and we questioned what that meant from the point of view across services. So, no, I remember that one well, and ultimately they said services would increase, likely increase. So there was going to be no net loss, and that was the word we got stuck on.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Any other questions, Councillor Edwards?
No, thanks.
No. All right. So I have a mover. Do I have a seconder? Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Tatchell. Thank you. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Item 18.1, Mayor's Report. Councillors, that has been circulated. Do I have a mover? Do I have a mover for my report? Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Item 18.2, Councillors' Report. I will go around the room. Councillor Ward. Thank you.
Nothing to report, Madam Mayor.
No. Councillor Tatchell.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, just one, Madam Mayor. Whilst I wasn't at the official opening of the new All Abilities Playground, and I've got to say that the people that turned up for the opening, because I was there, just not in the official capacity, and the people that have been utilising that facility, it's a credit to council on how that's turned out, because it's just amazing the amount of people. Almost tempted to jump on the Flying Foxes myself, to be honest. If I wasn't so heavy, I might have a crack.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Dudzik.
I was just going to say that I did attend the official opening of the All Abilities Playground, and I just wanted to congratulate staff for a fabulous project. It's the best playground that we've got in Moorabool, and I'm hoping that we can get a couple more of that standard in Moorabool, possibly in the Merrimack region, because it certainly delights a lot of kids and parents alike. So well done, and it's just fabulous. So congratulations to all the staff involved. I'd also like to say I noticed that there is an urgent item business from Councillor Ward. I'd just like to say that I was also contacted by the same lady, Jessica, and I'm really happy that Rod has made that urgent item, because I would have done it myself too. So well done to Jess. And yeah, it's really not impressive that the state government are trying to cut that program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. I will just add too that, yes, I'm I was speaking to some men that worked on the project for the playground, and there were some new elements that had never been used before, which I was quite surprised with. And I will say that the children's slides aren't really fit for adults, I found out. But anyway. So thank you. Do I have a councillor to move the councillor reports? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. I will now move to urgent business, and we'll go around the room again. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have distributed a proposed item from urgent business, which I'm seeking councillors' approval to table tonight. Apologies to Councillor Edwards. I haven't circulated by email, mate, but I have put it on your desk. David, for your information, the item of urgent business relates to the cancellation of funding for the Youth Engagement Support Program, otherwise known as YES, which funded a second youth worker to work with the youth in Moorabool. And we received an impassioned email today from one of the young ladies who participated in the program, and it was extremely well written, and it talked about how it supported the youth in Moorabool for their mental health, fostering a sense of community and re-engaging with education and employment. And they were devastated by the loss of funding, which means that this program will end in December this year. And the termination of the program, in her own words, could lead to an increase in youth crime, disengagement, reversing the progress made over the last few years. And it's devastating to think that a program which has brought so much benefit to our community and its youth could be taken away. So, David, my urgent notice of motion tonight, my item for urgent business tonight was that Council write to the Premier, the Minister for Youth, the Honorary Natalie Suleiman, the Minister for Children Victoria, the Honourable Lizzie Blanthorne, and the Member of Eureka, Michaela Settle, asking the State Government to reverse its decision to cut funding for the Youth Engagement Support Program to allow Moorabool to continue its essential work in supporting the youth in our community.
Okay.
You just second it.
Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Do I have any dissent to add that to urgent business? No. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you, Councillor Ward. And I'm assuming you'll contact the young resident. Thank you. Okay, so we've just accepted it into urgent business, so you'll move it again. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Tatchell, do you have any urgent business?
No urgent business here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards? Any urgent business?
No urgent business.
Councillor Dudzik?
No urgent business, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for attending tonight. We do not have a closed meeting to the public, confidential, so I will move to close the meeting. Thank you everyone for attending and for all your hard work. I will now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.